Okay, hello everybody. Again, welcome to another video going into more depth and explanation and elaboration around the content for the various topics for this unit. So in this particular video, I will be talking to the chapter in the textbook, the McDonald text, chapter 4, pages 124 to 172. And particularly around some of the aspects in regards to moving your particular philosophy of classroom management, which is starting to develop, and there's no prescriptions around necessarily having this philosophy clearly defined and delineated right now, because it's always ongoing as you read, as you engage, as you do activities and think and reflect and discuss with your peers. It will continue to emerge and to be solidified as you move forward. And certainly for those of you who have not had any prac experience, it's going to, philosophy and, the strategies and methods and procedures and ways you enact your philosophy are going to get really quite tested, and there'll be a lot of trial and error on your professional placement when you do it down the line. For those of you who have done your professional placement, you'll know this, that any initial philosophy that you may have developed leading up to your placement was certainly tested or reinforced, or probably a combination of both, and you modified it as you went along. And as teachers, that's what we do. We're constantly modifying and adapting what we do depending on the context, depending on the group of learners. But I think as I've been arguing throughout, it is important to have a strong philosophy. It is okay to merge different ideas, different approaches, as long as it works holistically together, that you're not combining two very opposite ends of the kind of spectrum, as it were, in regards to classroom management. You can't go in with a highly authoritative approach and then expect to develop conflict based on particular humanistic ways of going about it, or conflict resolution using particular methods that I guess are more laissez-faire, or enables the student to take responsibility, because those two approaches may not necessarily fit well together, and it'll be confusing for students. So a blended approach is good, and it just, again, it depends what it looks like and how it plays out in the classroom, and the kinds of rules and procedures and guidelines and codes of conduct you are suggesting to students that they will follow in your classroom. So, the focus of this video is, I guess, to move on that philosophy into the next stage, which is thinking about how will this actually work in the classroom? How am I going to, central question is, how am I going to enact this? So by enactment, I'm talking about, what is it that you say? What is it that you do? What are you modeling? What are you showing students? What examples are you working through? In what ways are you engaging with them from the very first moments that you meet them, that align with the philosophy? And it's all got to work together. And sometimes that comes from, say, feedback from me and experienced teacher educators, or experienced teachers, your supervisors and mentors out in schools, to sort of push back against and say, hang on a minute, this doesn't really align, or that particular procedure won't work with this group. And that's why I say it's very much a trial and error process. So don't get too caught up in thinking you must be totally across all the philosophies and all the approaches and all the ways of doing it. You kind of pick what seems to work well now, think deeply about it, put it into writing, and then as that writing process happens, and it is a process of experimentation in a way, and it's okay to experiment. It's okay to experiment with different pieces of the puzzle that you think, okay, will this fit together? I'm going to write it up as a set of classroom rules, and this doesn't really align, and then you shift and you change it, and you can get feedback on that as well. So I'm certainly very conscious of, when I'm marking the assessment, for example, that I know that most of you are still working your way through this, sometimes fumbling in the dark, sometimes with a few bright lights around you to illuminate the path. So please don't think that I'm going to expect you to be completely adhering to a particular theory and ensuring that that's robust all the way through, and that if there's a blend of something else, then I'm going to mark you down. Again, you can work with these things as it aligns with your particular values, with your particular sense of the kind of teacher you hope to become, the kinds of ways in which you're going to go about that. So I just wanted to, I guess, focus on one aspect here, and from my personal experience, because although these texts very much are, draw on the relevant research and literature, and many of the people who write these education theory textbooks about classroom management are themselves classroom teachers, but I suppose just another insight from my own experiences teaching secondary and also working with pre-service teachers such as yourself over many years, and hearing their experiences on placement, going to watch and observe and assess students as a university supervisor. For me, the section I think that you need to start to, I guess, articulate and moving again that from the philosophy, the strong foundational philosophy about what is your classroom management approach, how does that, how are we going to enact that philosophy? To me, this section starting on page 116 of the text, where it talks about the establishing classroom guidelines in your class. So chapter 4, and that section there around establishing guidelines, excuse me, let me just find it again. Establishing class guidelines, where it talks about this notion of, what, I'll just read it out here, sorry. So in developing a management plan, most teachers will include a section preventing student misbehaviour. Part of this section will be around the need for rules. In developing your own rules, you will need to decide on the style or approach you will adopt for your rule creation. Will you develop rules, a code of conduct, class constitution? Will you base them on rights and responsibilities or guiding student behaviour? You will need to decide this based on your educational philosophy and how you view student capacity to self-manage. So I guess I just want to talk a little bit to this. The text explores this and elaborates this in detail in chapter 4, and suggests a number of different strategies and ways to go about enacting your philosophy. And I just wanted to talk to, and I'll post this as a picture to go along with this video on the Facebook group. But for me, and again, giving that personal insight, the ways in which teachers conduct their classrooms, the way that you can articulate this, one way you can articulate this, again, I find keeping things simple and contained, and too many rules can get confusing for students. They'll forget about all those rules. So I don't know, keeping things as straightforward as you can, and then everything else spills out of that. Everything follows that. So for me, I find that creating pillars, for what I call the 4 pillars or the 4 values of a classroom learning environment, and making those the foundation of everything that you do with students, and the ways in which you talk to students and the ways in which you manage behaviour will always come back to these 4 pillars. And you start to engineer in your classroom this language, and you model it, you talk to it, you get students to model it and speak to it. And when they do misbehave, because again, one of the really important foundational expectations you must have, as I've mentioned previously, is that students will misbehave if given the chance, even the best students. So when that does happen, the ways in which you manage that misbehaviour, and there are different strategies, a range of different strategies for that, but the language you use and the examples you give come back to these 4 pillars. Again, this is just a suggestion. This is just what I use to a model very similar in my own classrooms. I've actually augmented it over the years as a way to teach students. Like, as I said, this stuff changes and shifts, and you improve on it and you fine tune it. So what I'm describing here, actually, I used let's call it version 1, an earlier version of this in my classrooms, and it's now it's been reiterated in several versions until I find that, for me, this is a really good model to suggest to pre-service teachers. Again, you don't have to adopt this. You can take parts of this and use it for yourself or not. It's completely up to you. This is the thing. It's what's going to work best for you. But again, for my money, this is I think an effective way forward. So the 4 pillars you can see in the picture there: respect, courtesy, empathy, and curiosity. So I'm just going to talk to each of those and explain what those mean. And again, this is what you would potentially be doing with students. You'd be describing about this really on the first day. You wouldn't let this go any longer. The first time you meet them in a classroom, you would go through this and explain what this means for you and how the students go about enacting these values as well. So let's look at the first one, respect. So that's the first pillar, the first foundational pillar in this learning environment that we're creating with each other, is respect. Now, this word gets used a great deal in teaching. You may remember it from your own years in secondary school or even before. And most often you hear it phrased in a now very ubiquitous term, mutual respect. So you'll see that, I'm sure, in many schools, if you do your placements in, may even have children yourself, and you've seen this in policy documents, behaviour management documents, foundational philosophies of schools and classrooms. This notion of mutual respect is really everywhere, and I guess that speaks to this notion of, well, if you respect me, I'll respect you. It's mutual. Then we build mutual respect. So I conduct myself in a particular way, earn your respect, and then it's given and it's taken. I've grown now, although it's something that's something I used to use a lot in my classroom previously when I was a secondary teacher. I've actually moved away from that notion of mutual respect. The reason being, I actually find that notion of exchange, respect as an exchange, as a commodity that we exchange between each other based on actions, to me, not as helpful as a different way to think about respect. It doesn't mean that it's not useful and important in trying to build a safe and inclusive classroom environment. Respect is very important, obviously. But for me, the respect that forms this foundational value is not about mutual respect necessarily, and neither is it about I'm the teacher, therefore you will respect me. Certainly, some teachers may feel that way still, just by their position of authority, that they earn respect. And in some countries that may work, in some particular school context. In this country, it may still work. But on the whole, going into a classroom expecting respect because you are a teacher is flawed. That's going to lead to more problems than solutions in your classroom management. And you're more likely to think, well, then, oh, they're misbehaving because they disrespect me, which actually may not be anything about you. It may be, but it may not be. But anyway, so it's neither of those two conceptualizations of the term respect. For me, I feel the notion of respect is more about the fact that we as a collective, and you include yourself as the teacher there, in a collective learning environment, you being the teacher and the students together as a collective, we respect this, meaning the place and time in which we are in, and the privilege that goes with that, in regards to the fact that this is amazing that we get to be together and learn. We should respect that. We should respect that we live in a safe environment where we can do this, where we are not under the threat of violence, under the threat of intimidation. All of you have access to free education. Yes, I know that that's an ideal that's not necessarily always met, because there's different standards of free education, what that means. But anyway, regardless of that, for me, respect is about respecting this. And that's what you say to them, respecting this, what we have here, the opportunity to learn together with each other and grow, and hopefully walk out of here at the end of the year knowing something we didn't know before, doing something we couldn't do before that will help us in some way. To me, we should respect that. So again, it gets away from that exchange notion. It gets away from the top down, I'm a teacher, respect my authority. It's more respecting the privilege of access than anything. I know for teenagers, young teenagers, that might be a hard thing to conceptualize, because in their little world, they don't think that, oh, this is actually a privilege, having free education and access to a teacher, a knowledgeable practitioner. But still, you can talk to it, and then you can give examples, and you can talk through stories of children who go to school in different parts of the world. However you might want to do that is up to you. But anyway, that's my particular conceptualization of respect, and how it may inform and guide the ways in which you manage students. Because, for example, when you respect the learning environment and the privilege that brings of access, you respect the things in it, meaning the desks, the tables, the books, the computers. So if you have a student who might be, gouging out their initials on the desk, you can talk to that notion of respect and respecting the objects that frame the learning environment. So, the challenges you may face in regards to behavior management, again, lead back to that value of respect. So the second value you see there is courtesy. And I think courtesy is sometimes missing a bit, I guess, in today's social media world. Especially you see on Facebook and things, and social media, there's very little respect given a lot of times to people's attitudes, opinions, beliefs, and people are very good at shouting at each other, it seems to me now more so than ever. So for me, courtesy is really about manners and being polite and being courteous to each other, giving each other in the learning environment, and giving you as well, the teacher, the chance to speak, the chance to ask questions, the chance to share opinions, beliefs, attitudes, ideas, to share who you are, your life experiences, and being accepting of that. And being courteous, to me, it's not just about yes sir, no sir, yes please, no thank you. It's not just about using the words. To me, being courteous is an attitude towards learning. Being courteous, once again, that's why I think it aligns well with the conceptualization of respect I've just given. Being courteous to the learning environment, being courteous to the people who occupy that learning environment, giving each other the chance to learn. Because if you're acting up, if you're shouting, for example, and talking very loud with your desk partner about something that happened over the weekend, you're not being courteous to somebody else who's sitting just in front of you, for example, who's trying to listen and learn and work. So again, it allows you to talk to students about their behaviours in regards to others, that yes, you and your behaviours don't just impact you and your learning, it impacts others' learning as well, and it impacts your ability, as the teacher, saying, this impacts my ability to teach that person, okay, or others, or you, if you're not courteous towards, again, the process and the access we have to this learning environment. So that's courtesy. You'll see there the word empathy. I think empathy is a critical aspect of teaching, not just for yourself as a teacher, being empathetic and being able to empathize with your learners. But I think empathy needs to frame itself around everything that happens in the learning environment. So, basically this just means, once again, aligning with the other two pillars, understanding each other a little bit better, understanding how each other is feeling, and an orientation to understanding, the perspective of others. You may not share the same goals, the same practices, whether that be cultural, religious, language, background. A student sitting, 14-year-old student sitting learning in a high school actually doesn't share a lot with you as the teacher, believe it or not. I mean, you're in a completely different position. You're orientated in a completely different way compared to that student. Yes, you're all both in that learning environment, hopefully trying to achieve something, but from very different orientations and perspectives, you're coming there. So the idea is that the student is empathetic of that orientation of you, and vice versa. You are empathetic of their orientation as a student and what that means for them. I mean, even, sometimes as teachers in secondary schools specifically, think about the student's timetable. Yes, you've got your own timetable. You're teaching right to different content areas, etc., and you're communicating this and designing learning. Students in high school have to receive all of that in delineated periods of time and move from one subject to another. At least you're teaching all roundly within the same subject, which keeps your head orientated in the same general capacity in a discipline area. Think about it, and you can remember from your own high school days, moving from math to social studies to physical education to ending in home economics. I mean, what a strange, fabricated kind of reality that is. So be empathetic of that. Be empathetic of maybe the fact that students have just, come from lunch where it was chaos out there. Maybe there was a fight happening out in the yard, or maybe there was, something else going on. They were being bullied as they came towards your classroom. Maybe it was stinking hot outside, and the students, had to, just cool down in any way possible, and they're feeling hot and bothered, So again, be empathetic of their position, their positionality as a student within what you're doing. So that's empathy. Lastly about empathy, it can be taught. So this is the thing. People think, that person's psychotic, they have no empathy, and that may be true. There's certainly people who maybe lack the capacity for empathy. Those people always scare me, or thinking about those people anyway. But I feel empathy can be taught, and certainly if it's winding its way into the DNA of your classroom philosophy and the way in which you enact this philosophy, I feel in those micro interactions with students, whether it's one-on-one or in groups, as you're moving around and working with them and managing them and resolving conflict, you can talk to and teach empathy. And I think it should be done in schools, certainly. And then lastly, but not leastly, certainly, and again, these four pillars, the reason with a picture in the background, they're all even, right? So it's the four pillars and none are higher than the other. The fourth pillar is curiosity. And to me, this, I think, works very nicely in wrapping around the rest of the pillars, is this notion of having a will to learn, to wonder, and to find things that excite you. And I think if you can manage students in a way that ignites their curiosity, and really this gets back to a very old adage in teaching that says, your best behavior management or classroom management tool is your curriculum. Meaning that if you design, engineer, create engaging learning experiences that ignite students' curiosity, that gets them thinking, that gives them ownership over their learning, then they are much more likely to want to listen to you, to want to follow the processes of the lesson so they can achieve an answer to the question, as it were, or learn more or discover more. All of those aspects of, I'm sure, why you've wanted to get into teaching in the first place is, stoke those fires, those curious fires of young minds. I mean, certainly that was the primary reason I decided to get into teaching, was to be part of that process, to be the leader in that process, that you can lead students and say, hey, follow me, like, come with me. This is going to be really an amazing kind of learning experience so you can learn more about the world or yourself or each other. That's not going to happen all the time, certainly, and even the best teachers, they don't have those kinds of lessons every single day. Hopefully there are moments every day where you have that. And sometimes, we design lessons that are much more engaging and exciting than others. Certainly, say test revision isn't necessarily going to be engaging, exciting, or ignite curiosity. But again, we're thinking about what's the stuff that forms the foundation of your, classroom management philosophy, and how do you enact this? Well, if you're going to be thinking about strategies, how do you ensure that, yes, the students follow the rules that you want in order for them to be safe, but then as well, how do you not squash curiosity? How do you not essentially just turn them into automatons? I mean, you don't want that, do you? You don't want them just to be little compliant automatons doing exactly what you say all the time, exactly what the prescribed curriculum says, etc., etc. They've got to have some sense of independence and some sense of ownership over what they're doing. And to me, this notion of curiosity, being curious, acting with curiosity, and guiding them in that, I feel is a really good way to start to think about, well, how you're going to engage these students. So I hope this has been useful for you, and thank you for engaging and watching.